Okay, welcome everyone to this month's Art and Conversation. Before we start off, before I introduce the program and our speaker today, I'm just going to start off with my visual description. The visual description is something that we've been practicing in Art and Conversation, actually I think since we went online virtually with this program. And the visual description is to help assist our blind and low vision audience members in being able to get a sense of who the speakers are. So my name is Jaleesa Johnston. I am a Black woman with black hair, curly hair that's pulled up into a bun. I have black rimmed glasses on. I have hooped earrings. I have a purple plaid button-up shirt. I'm sitting in a blue room with bookcases behind me and a lampshade. And that is my visual description. So I would like to welcome everybody and thank you all for joining us today for Art and Conversation. Before we get going, I also want to mention that if you have any questions throughout this program, please enter your questions into the Q&A box if you're in the Zoom webinar. If you're viewing on Facebook Live, just enter them into the chat box and we have someone who will feed them into our Q&A here on Zoom. So welcome to this month's Art and Conversation. Art and Conversation is a monthly program that's been running for a very long time. And during this program, it's an opportunity for people to come together, usually when we were open, to meet in a physical space, to have coffee and donuts for the first hour, and then to use the second hour to listen to a speaker talk about either art on view in the museum, or to talk about their own practice, or to talk about art that's happening out in the larger Portland community. And since COVID, we have been able to rework this program as a virtual experience and still hopefully get to engage in some of the rich discussion and thinking that we were doing and are doing around art. And this is the silver lining about COVID is it's given us an opportunity to partner in new ways, in wider ways. And it's also one of the reasons why we're able to do this program today with Raven. So I want to introduce the program by first saying that this program today is a special one because it is in partnership with Literary Arts and the Portland Book Festival. And to give those of you a sense of what that is, if you haven't been able to attend it in the past, the Portland Book Festival happens in the month of November. And it's where literary arts celebrates authors and Portland's community of readers through an annual festival where authors are reading from their books. There's discussions. It's a very lively time. This year, the festival is for several weeks in November, and it's all virtual. And to give you background on Literary Arts is a community-based nonprofit with a mission to engage readers, support writers, and inspire the next generation of great literature. We have been very fortunate to partner with Literary Arts over the past 5 years, doing author pop-up readings in the galleries, where normally an author is paired with a work that's on view that echoes themes in their writing. And it's a very, very full day. There's a lot of high energy. And these pairings really showcase a range of literature from poetry and short stories to novels and cookbooks. This year, we are still able to bring you pop-up readings virtually. You can view these virtual pop-ups throughout the Portland Book Festival schedule, and you can either go to the Portland Book Festival website to view them. You can also go to the museum's YouTube channel where we also have them posted. We've been able to expand this partnership this year in really fun ways, and part of that is this Art and Conversation. We are very excited to welcome and host author Raven Leilani for a reading and Q&A discussion of her first novel, Luster. Featured in this year's Literary Arts Portland Book Festival, Leilani's book follows Edie, a young artist, as she navigates the constantly shifting landscapes of contemporary sexual manners and racial politics. Raven Leilani's work has been published in Granta, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunctions, The Cut, and New England Review, among other publications. Leilani received her MFA from NYU and was an Axinn Foundation Writer-in-Residence. Luster is her first novel. And with that, I would like to welcome and thank Raven for her time.
Well, thank you for having me. It's really cool to be able to do this. I was just saying to you that I wish, things were different where I might be able to actually travel over there and do this in person. But for now, we'll just do it this way. And so I appreciate everyone who came and who's watching. So I thought I would just start with a short reading from my book, and I'm going to start right from the beginning, so there's no need to preface. The first time we have sex, we are both fully clothed at our desk during working hours, bathed in blue computer light. He is uptown processing a new bundle of microfiche, and I'm downtown handling corrections to new Labrador detective manuscript. He tells me what he ate for lunch and asks if I can manage to take off my underwear in my cubicle without anyone noticing. His messages come with impeccable punctuation. He is fond of words like taste and spread. The empty text field is full of possibilities. Of course, I worry about IT remoting into my computer or my internet history warranting yet another disciplinary meeting with HR. But the risk, the thrill of a third pair of unseen eyes, the idea that someone in the office with that sweet post-lunch break optimism might come across this thread and see how tenderly Eric and I have built this private world. In his first message, he points out a few typos in my online profile and tells me he has an open marriage. His profile pictures are candid and loose, a grainy photo of him asleep in the sand, a photo of him shaving, taken from behind. It is this last photo that moves me, the dirty tile and soft recession of steam, his face in the mirror, stern with quiet scrutiny. I save the photo to my phone so I can look at it on the train. Women look over my shoulder and smile, and I let them believe he is mine. Otherwise, I've not had much success with men. This is not a statement of self-pity. This is just a statement of the facts. Here's a fact. I have great breasts, which have warped my spine. More facts. My salary is very low. I have trouble making friends, and men lose interest in me when I talk. It always goes well initially, then I talk too explicitly about my ovarian torsion or my rent. Eric is different. 2 weeks into our correspondence, he tells me about the cancer that ravaged half his maternal family. He tells me about the aunt he loved who made potions with foxhair and hemp, how she was buried with a corn husk doll she made of herself. Still, he describes his childhood home lovingly, the digressions of farmland between Milwaukee and Appleton, the yellow-breasted chats and tundra swans that would appear in his yard looking for seed. When I talk about my childhood, I only talk about the happy parts, the tape of Spice World I received for my 5th birthday, the Barbie I melted in the microwave when no one was home. Of course, the context of my childhood, the boy bands, the Lunchables, the impeachment of Bill Clinton, only emphasizes our generational gap. Eric is sensitive about his age and about mine. It makes a considerable effort to manage a 23-year discrepancy. He follows me on Instagram and leaves lengthy comments on my posts, retired internet slang interspersed with earnest remarks about how the light falls on my face. Compared to the inscrutable advances of younger men, it is a relief. We talk for a month before our schedules align. We try to meet earlier, but things always come up. This is just one way his life is different from mine. There are people who count on him, and sometimes they need him urgently. Between his abrupt cancellations, I realize that I need him too, in a way that makes my dreams delirious expressions of thirst, long stretches of yellow desert, cathedrals hemmed in dripping moss. By the time we set our first real date, I would have done anything. He wanted to go to Six Flags. We decided to go on a Tuesday. When he rolls up in his white Volvo, I've only made it to the part of my pre-date routine where I try to find the most appropriate laugh. I put on 3 dresses before I find the right one. I tie up my braids and line my eyes. There are dishes in the sink and a pervasive salmon smell in the apartment, and I don't want him to think it has anything to do with me. I put on a complex underwear that is not so much underwear as a bundle of string. And when I stand before the mirror, I think to myself, you're a desirable woman. You're not a dozen gerbils in a skin casing. Outside, he is double parked. He leans against the car like this and remains as I come out, his eyes bright and still. His hair is darker than I expected, a black so opaque it was blue. His face is almost obscenely symmetrical, but one of his eyebrows is higher than the other, and it makes his smile seem a little smug. It is the second day of summer, and all the city's powers have no sway over him. I reach for his hand, trying not to swallow my tongue, and something feels strange. Of course there are nerves. In person, he's a total daddy, his face alert and hard, softened only by the slight recession of his hair. But this strange feeling has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with me looking past his sensuous mouth and slightly askew nose for any indication that he is as nervous as I am. It is that it is 8:15 a.m., and I feel happy. I'm not on the L, smelling someone's lukewarm pickles, wishing I were dead. Edie, I say, extending my hand. I know, he says, his long fingers settling between mine, too gently. I wanted to be more forward, to fold him into an easy, extroverted hug, but what happens is this limp handshake, this aversion of my eyes, this unsurprising and immediate surrender of power. And then the worst part of meeting a man in broad daylight, the part where you see him seeing you, deciding in this split second whether any future cunnilingus will be enthusiastic or perfunctory. He opens the door, and there is a fluffy blue dye hanging in the rearview mirror, a half-eaten bag of Jolly Ranchers in the passenger seat. His correspondence online has been honest, full of his stuttering sincerity. However, as we have already told the stories you might tell on a first date, it is harder to begin. He brings up the weather, and then we are talking about climate change. After a while of talking generally about burning to death, we pull into the park. It's hard not to be aware of an age discrepancy when you are surrounded by the most rococo trappings of childhood, the Tweety bird balloons, the plastic soulless eyes of the Taz mascot, the Dippin' Dots. As we enter the gates, I feel the high fructose sun of the park like an insult. This is a place for children. He has taken me to a place for children. I watch his face for any indication that this might be a joke, or a telling manifestation of his anxiety about the mere 23 years I spent on Earth. The age discrepancy doesn't bother me. Beyond the fact of older men having stable finances and a different understanding of the clitoris, there is the potent drug of a keen power imbalance, of being caught in the excruciating limbo between their disinterest and expertise, their panic at the world's growing indifference, their rage and adult failure, funneled into the reduction of your body into gleaming, elastic parts. Except for him, this seems to be new territory, not simply to be out on a date with someone who is not his wife, and decades younger, but to be out with a girl who happens to be Black. I can feel it in how cautiously he says African American, how he absolutely refuses to say the word Black. As a rule, I try to avoid popping that dusty cherry. I cannot be the first Black girl a white man dates. I cannot endure the nervous renditions of backpacker rap, the conspicuous effort to be colloquial, or the smugness of pink men in kente cloth. As we make our way over to the lockers, a father and son are vomiting behind a Bugs Bunny standee. I open my locker, and there's a diaper inside. Eric sees it and calls over a janitor. He says he's sorry, and the apology feels like it is not only about the diaper, but more how this choice of location is turning out. I feel bad about that. I feel bad that my first instinct is to manage his feelings instead of suggesting somewhere else to go, that we will both have to endure my attempt to prove in the course of this date that I'm having a good time, and that this is not his fault. A month is too long to talk online. In the time we've been talking, my imagination has run wild. Based on his liberal use of the semicolon, I just assumed this date would go well. But everything is different IRL. For one thing, I'm not as quick on my feet. There's no time to consider my words or craft a clever response in iOS notes. There is also the fact of body heat, the inarticulable parts of being close to a man, the sweet, feral thing underneath their cologne, the way it sometimes feels as if there were no whites to their eyes. A man's profound adrenal craziness, the tenuousness of his restraint. I feel it on me and inside me, like I'm being possessed. When we talked online, we both did some work to fill in the blanks. We filled them optimistically, with the kind of yearning that brightens and distorts. We've had elaborate hypothetical dinners where we talked about the doctor's appointments we were afraid to make. Now there are no blanks, and when he rubs sunblock onto my back, it is both too little and too much. Is this okay? He asks, his breath hot on the back of my neck. Uh-huh, I say, trying not to make the contact into more than it is. However, his hands are excellent. They are warm and wide and soft, and have not been laid in months. For a moment, I'm sure I'm going to cry, which is not unusual, because I cry often and everywhere, and most especially because of this one Olive Garden commercial. I excuse myself and run to the bathroom, where I look into the mirror and reassure myself that there are bigger things in the moment I am in. Gerrymandering, genealogy conglomerate selling my cheek swabs to the state. Of course, there is still the business of trying to look sexy while hurtling across the sky. Like most white people who eat beans in the woods, undeterred by the fresh fecal evidence of hungry bears. Eric finds his mortality and soft, meaty body a petty, incidental thing. I, on the other hand, am acutely aware of all the ways I might die. So when the sighing teenage park associate slaps my harness down and slogs over to the levers, I think of all my unfinished business. The quartered pistachio gelato in my freezer, the 1.5 wanks left in my half-dead vibrator, and Mr. Rogers' box set. Eric's enthusiasm is infectious. After the first 2 rides, I'm enjoying myself, and not just because dying means I won't have to pay my student loans. He laces his fingers into mine and drags me to the front, apparently serious enough about his park experience to have paid the extra fee to skip the line. I go to tie my shoelaces and return to find him talking to the Porky Pig mascot about entry-level positions at the archive. We always need quality customer service, he says, pressing his phone number into Porky's pink felt mitt. We board the highest coaster in the park, and for the 3rd time, and he screams like it is the first. He really, truly screams. At first, it is off-putting, but as we scale the last track, I realize that I like it. I like it a lot. I can't decide if it's his dissonance, the girliness of his inclination compared to his mass, my envy of his wonder, the glee in his terror, the willingness to experience anew what is familiar. His joy is raw in a way that makes me feel like I can unzip my skin suit and show him all the ooze inside. But not yet. There is a sadness about his fervor, the way it feels slightly put on, as if he has something to prove. He looks over at me when we reach the top, the wind carved through his hair. Behind his eyes, I see myself fractured into pieces. Suddenly it feels painful to be this ordinary, to be this open to him, as he looks at me and pretends I am not just a cheaper version of a fast Italian car. I wish every day could be like this, he says, when we reach the most terrifying part of the ride, when they hold you in midair and force you to anticipate the drop. Below us, the park is turning on its lights. All I want for him is to have what he wants. I want to be uncomplicated and undemanding. I want no friction between his fantasy and the person I actually am. I want all that, and I want none of it. I want the sex to be familiar and tepid, for him to be unable to get it up, for me to be too open about my IBS, so that we are bonded in mutual consolation. I want us to fight in public, and when we fight in private, I want him to maybe accidentally punch me. I want us to have a long, fruitful birdwatching career, and then I want us to find out we have cancer at exactly the same time. Then I remember his wife. The coaster eases downward, and we fall. So I think I'll stop there.
I'd muted myself. Thank you. So I know that some of you are probably joining in again or tuning back in from the first time. So again, if you are on Facebook, please enter any questions that you have for Raven in the chat. And then we have someone that will be feeding them into our Q&A here at Zoom. And then if you are viewing through Zoom, please go ahead and actually, I don't think we have a Q&A set up here, so go ahead and enter your questions into the chat as well. But I will go ahead and get started. I have some questions already. So let's see, there's a few different areas that I want to start from, but just to sort of recap and stop me at any point, sorry, it's my dog, stop me at any point if I am getting, I don't want to spoil anything for anyone that hasn't read it. Please stop me, because sometimes I'm bad at that and I'm gonna do my best not to.
I'm bad at that too, and I think it's okay. A light spoiler is okay.
Okay, cool. So Edie's on this date with Eric, and eventually Edie's going to end up in sort of an interesting relationship with Eric and his wife Rebecca and their daughter Akila. Well, my first question is, when you were talking, the word powerhead came up, and that relationship difference or that age difference between Edie and Eric. And then that got me thinking more about sort of the power dynamics that are at play, first just between Edie and Eric and Rebecca, when she eventually starts to, like, you know, be more involved with their everyday life. And so I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just sort of speaking to maybe some of the ways that you're seeing that power dynamic take place, as well as, and then when you add Akila in and the power dynamics there with their daughter.
Sure. So I think, you know, this book, it starts off, its primary relationship is the one that I was just reading, where Edie meets Eric. You know, they've only known each other online, and that sort of digital interface, it lends itself to a different, like a specific kind of intimacy where you can kind of unmask yourself because there is still a barrier between you, but at the same time, it is not meeting a person in the flesh. So at this moment, they finally meet and have to reconcile that, that digital projection with the flesh. And the reality between them is that he is a person, right, who has a family and has demands on his time that take him away and that make him particularly available. And he's also much older, and he's white, and he's male, and those those parts have great bearing on the way they relate to each other. And with Edie, that excites her. It does excite her, that discrepancy between them. And there's, there are maybe a number of reasons why perhaps that excites her. She kind of outlines a few up front, which is that, she's drawn to the kind of the way that he's self-realized and the way that she isn't. She's drawn to the way that he can kind of be authentically in his body in the way that she feels she can't. And you kind of see that as when she interacts with him, she's kind of sitting back away from herself, calculating and trying to project a more palatable version of herself. She cares very much about how she'll be perceived by him and by a lot of people in this book, So she respects and also envies his ability, his station in the world, which affords him the grace to be himself, the grace to be fallible, but also the authority. She also enjoys the idea of deferring to his authority, and kind of, it is in one way a way that she is sort of seizing her own power in choosing to lean into this dynamic, but it is also a kind of surrender that departs from the kind of track of her everyday life, where she is subject to the brutality of racism, sexism, and capitalism. And so this kind of surrender it's like a breath out, it's a relief. But it also means that much of her kind of personal physical drama is out of frame, at least externally. So that power dynamic means that she cannot really be totally wholly herself. And that the person that she's with cannot fully understand the precarity of her station. So I think that too is more with Rebecca the wife, that eventually kind of becomes more of a bulk of the book, where you have two women, so they're women, and so they relate differently in that way, and are able to kind of show each other their most, at a certain point, unvarnished faces. But ultimately, they are also, again, two different people in two different stages of life. Edie is trying to find some kind of stability, trying to find the time and the means and the right to do her art. And Rebecca is much more realized already, and much more kind of not static, but is already kind of fixed in her position, and it's a position of comfort. And so that power and the relationship between them is real. It kind of renders that relationship into one that is transactional. And with Aquila, it's a rare instance in which Edie has more power, and the way that she wields that is kind of generously. We kind of see her looking for affirmation and looking for care from people who have more power, or people who do not share her experience, or who have no desire to really see her. But when it comes to Aquila, who's a child, a Black child who's cobbling together her idea of Blackness and womanhood, Edie becomes that authority
and that sort of kinship that she needs. So that, I think, is how like the power is working, and, with all sort of 4 of those main characters.
Yeah. And it was interesting when you were just talking about that difference in being realized, because I remember when I was reading the book, one of the things that I was struck by, and at first, and it obviously gets more complicated, and I think that's something that's really rich about the characters in this story, is all the complexities there. But for Akilah, at first I was like, man, this girl knows who she is. And I still think that's true. I don't think that's not true. Of course, she's young. She's 13, right? And so she's still like very young in the world and figuring certain things out. But there's just like a core part of her that's so like solid.
Yes.
And yeah, I don't know. That was just something. And I could see, that you can see that solid core, but then you could also see some of the softness coming through a little bit more with her relationship with Edie.
But that hardness and that like solid core is like has been kind of wrought through necessity. She's a child who has kind of dealt with extreme instability in her life and trying to find a home where she will be able to kind of live indefinitely. And so her like first instinct is really to preserve that stability. And so she is absolutely, in a way, she's like older psychologically than a child her age should be. And that is a sad thing. And so the parts that are like tender and like half formed are the parts that I think are how a child should be, or the parts that she actually keeps out of view because she hasn't really had a place, and perhaps even this house is in that place where she can have those kind of tender and vulnerable aspects of herself out in the open. But through Edie, through her relationship with Edie, that slowly comes to the fore because Edie's presence somehow, right? Even though Edie is chaos, but like Edie's presence allows her that safety to kind of let the less realized self come to the fore.
Mm-hmm. And I think, my own personal opinion is probably allowing, like, she's chaos, but allowing that, I know, the vulnerability of just being like who you are, or embracing who you are. Yes, is what is there in that relationship for allowing for that.
Yes.
And then I also wanted to touch on just the way that art plays a role, because it's sort of, in the beginning, it's so light, but then it starts to grow. In the beginning, Edie just sort of lightly talks about it, is like, oh yeah, I have paints and I do this thing. I have a sketchbook. I showed it to someone and they didn't, I'm great, but I'm not terrible. And then over time it starts to grow. And I'd love if you could talk a little bit more about the role that art is playing in the arc of the story.
100%. So, for me, that was really important because I really love anything that delves seriously into what it means to carve out like time and to even have the means to make art, what it feels like to kind of have to maintain that faith in yourself to make art. And so when you do find, like you mentioned, you find her in the beginning, it is kind of a little bit of a footnote. It's a thing she does after a date, that she pulls out her old art supplies and all the paint is hard and old, and what's forward is that she hasn't painted for 2 years, right? And I thought that was important to start from that point, because I think that's reality for a lot of people who make things, which is the huge gaps in that journey where you are, where you're dealing with other things and trying to kind of handle other needs, or perhaps you are kind of trying to navigate a real kind of moment or a sense of defeat you felt around your art that has kept you from being able to, come to the page or come to the canvas. And so it has been 2 years, like she has not been practicing her craft. And so to kind of have to find like something to animate you out of that stasis, I think is like a real thing for so many of us. And it happens at like at the end of the first chapter where she kind of finds her way back to it, and it's messy, and it's like it's pure id, and it's feeling, and less study, but I think feeling is where it starts. And so as we move along, we kind of see her at work trying to, you know, find affirmation from people who are, you know, in different modes of practicing their art seriously, like professionally. In that case, it's, you know, the coworker she has in the art department, who she has like a kind of side thing with, and but who she actually legitimately looks to for affirmation of her work, and who absolutely does not give that to her. And that too is part of the artistic journey, is trying to find people who see the merit in your work, and help you keep going. And a lot of that process is realizing that the people you look to, realizing who will actually fill that role for you. And for a lot of the book, she is sort of scrambling, trying to find that person. And also, most importantly, I think, scrambling to find the space and the means to even make art at all. So that's why work is central to this book, which is because in order to make art, she kind of has to find a path around her day job or the way she eats in order to do the work. And that too is a reality for a lot of us making art, where the work gets done in these sort of like liminal hours that happen after we, you know, do the work that feeds us and that like pays our bills, and the kind of psychic toll that takes on you when you are trying to kind of manage both. And so one reason why she's not painting is because she just can't, like, she does not have the time or really truly the means. And so that the kind of arc of art along the book follows that, you know, what it means to kind of find the, you know, inspiration after a long like moment of defeat or lull in which you're not creating anything at all. What it means to try and find the people who will affirm you and help you keep going. What it means to try and make work while you're doing the work that literally keeps you alive, you know, the job that keeps you alive. And then towards the end of the book, we get more into like the actual, like the necessity of practice and craft, and like of actually doing the work, and how that gives you the right to say that you are that you are an artist. You're an artist if you're doing your craft. And so she moves out of this state of not making to furiously making. And part of that is, you know, because in the second half of the book, those questions of survival are kind of are resolved because she's in this house and no longer trying to figure out how to make rent. And I think that maybe that's a bit of a spoiler, but it has huge bearing on her productivity. But also she finds a person who challenges her, who tells her when her art's not good, you know, who tells her when she's onto something. And it's a really fraught relationship. It's the relationship she has with Rebecca, but it's one in which another serious woman, and it's not a mistake that it's a woman who is finally the person who introduces this rigor into her work, takes her up on this offer that she has been kind of, you know, giving out throughout this text, which is she wants someone desperately to take her seriously. And so after she finds someone up to take her up on that, she's making stuff, you know, she's making stuff, and even still she's coming up against her limits because it's always a process. But out of that work, which is both faith and like the kind of luck of time and means, and discipline, she's finally kind of arriving at a place where something is happening. And I think that I wanted that hopefully to feel liberating.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that I personally appreciated about the book, and you know, we'll get more to this in the next question, because I know you're a writer, but you're also a painter. And I also make artwork. And one of the things I really appreciated was, like, I remember at one point in the book, she goes to her locker and she just grabbed like things to me that were like like just like little bits and pieces. I think she like grabbed a tube of paint or something. It's like the weirdest thing to grab. Why would you grab that? But then I thought back in my own journey of creating, and it's just, there's these moments where even if you can grab just like, or have that one little thing, like, you know, my camera, or maybe I'm not using it actively, but if I can just like have this one little thing
Yes.
present in the space, that almost becomes a thread that keeps the heartbeat of the potential to create alive. And I like that
Absolutely.
he was continually sort of holding that in some way, shape, or form throughout. Just something I could really relate with.
I really appreciate that. And I like the way you put that.
Yeah, it's true. It's not, I think there's always this thought that it's constant creation, furious creation, and if you're not doing that, but it's like, yo, sometimes.
Yeah, right. sometimes life, you know, sometimes life. And like that is, I mean, that's true. I think that to have those, you know, like those sort of remnants of craft, at least around in your environment, is an invitation to eventually, when you can, make. But I mean, that is why her tools were out of view entirely. She wasn't making. But when you have something, you know, something to tether you to that, I think that can be generative. But I'm sorry, I think I didn't even answer your question. What was it? Your question about both writing and painting?
Oh yeah, so that was my next bit, because I was like, oh, I'm gonna get
Oh, I thought you.
I hadn't asked it yet. I was like, I'm gonna insert my comment because I'm feeling the vibe I'm creating right now. But no, my other question is, I'm just so interested in your work as an artist, as both a writer and a painter, and how you see the two, I mean, just how you see those two mediums, and how they've maybe like shifted throughout your, you know, your journey, and then also how they have influenced the way that the book came to be.
Sure. So, I mean, painting was the very first thing I ever did and ever loved. And at a certain point, I kind of put that aside, because I was truly grappling with like the limits of my skill. And at that time, I was a teenager. I was about 18, and like considering where to go for college. So it was either like strictly an art school or a liberal arts school. And I chose to go to a liberal arts school so I'd have more options. And I am ultimately glad I did that. But like I have had those moments over and over again, you know, but that was the first one I can think of where especially because it's a competitive discipline, and one that is, you come up in an environment of critique. So you have to be, and are oriented to be, real about your work and what you can do. And so I had those moments where I simply knew I just had more work to do. And I wanted that work that I had to do to be private, because that was, for me, the way I could preserve the joy of doing it. But that crops up in my writing all the time, what it means to kind of face up to that, to your limits, what it means to fail, to fail a little bit. And so that's something that I'm, in terms of art, like painting to writing, I'm obsessed with writing about, where what does it mean to kind of start making after a long time of not making, or start making after a long time of feeling that you weren't capable of making anything. And kind of, yeah, the failure involved in the entire kind of pursuit of art. So for me, painting relates to writing in that it was the first artistic failure I ever felt deeply. And those are instructive, because I've definitely felt that with writing when I first started. It's a huge part of pursuing any art, and you have to get good with that. And so I think that, like, in terms psychologically, kind of helped me be steely, and helped me kind of be hardened in the way that I think you have to be to kind of pursue it But it also trained me, I think, to want to look closely at whatever reality I was trying to replicate on the canvas or on the page. So I think that at least, I mean, it depends on the kind of art you're talking about. I guess I'm talking more about like replicating the figure or replicating like generally realistic ideas of like the natural world onto the canvas. Not like photorealistic. I mean, I really, really love the Impressionists because of the way they kind of translate that natural world into the canvas. But the idea of any kind of art form, I think, requires a level of observation that is like almost perverse. And so that's how I think the writing and painting tied together for me. Is it taught me early on that to look closely, to observe deeply, and that's what I hoped to bring to my prose. Yeah, I think I wouldn't have arrived there if I hadn't had painting in my life first.
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. That is something that I noticed when reading the book. Just
Thank you.
The saturation of the senses are very there, especially following Edie, and like just the way she notices things or observes like these little details, and how that becomes part of sort of not necessarily anchoring, but understanding where you are in the space or where you are in the world or where she is in the world.
I really appreciate that. And, I think that part of that too is that, I'm writing a Black woman, and, so to be a Black woman who is moving through the world intact or as safely as possible, you must be hyper vigilant. Like that is sort of like, it's not a romantic thing in a way. It's a sad thing, because I do think that hypervigilance is kind of like it precludes real engagement with it precludes being present, I should say, but at the same time it makes you have to be so present that you are that you kind of observing and cataloging so that you can move safely through the world. So yeah, you kind of have to be a student to be safe.
Thank you. Well, I would love to just check in. I think I want to give the audience a few seconds. If you have any lingering questions, now's your time to enter them either into the Facebook chat or into the Zoom chat. And I think while just giving people a minute to do that, I do want to give a plug because you are about to dash off to another program today. Very busy. So, and for those of you that are interested in continuing to follow the conversation, not this particular conversation, but to continue to follow conversations around Leicester, you can also find Raven at a program at noon as a part of the Portland Book Festival. The program is called Tainted Love, Rebecca Dinerstein Night, Raven Leilani with John Free. And that's at noon, and you can go to the Portland Book Festival website and catch that. It's a live stream, similar to this one, yeah?
Yeah.
Cool. And then just checking in. All right, I think that there are no questions. Is there anything more or additional that you would like to add? No pressure.
No, this is perfect. Thank you. I really appreciate you, and thank you for having me.
No, thank you for joining us in Art and Conversation today, and we really appreciate having you and being able to think more about your work. And let's see, I feel like there's one more announcement. Also, if you're interested in more Portland Book Festival and PAM/Northwest Film Center collaborations, on Friday, the 20th at 4 p.m., Northwest Film Center and Literary Arts are having a Zoom happy hour with award-winning writer Charles Yu. So tune into that as well. And other than that, we will see you at the next Art and Conversation. Thank you again, Raven. This has been awesome.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time. And I hope everybody has a lovely day.
Bye.